In the Christmas of 2019, my best friends Ethan, Liam, and I decided to escape the usual family chaos and rent a cozy cabin. We were all just past our mid-20s, living far from our families and utterly exhausted from work. Honestly, the idea of spending a few days doing absolutely nothing sounded perfect. Our cabin, tucked deep in the woods about an hour's drive from the nearest town, technically belonged to some sort of community. If you could call a scattered dozen of cabins, each a mile apart, a community. We arrived on Christmas Eve, loaded down with mountains of food, snacks, and beer. Ethan even brought his Xbox, so we drank and played video games until 2 a.m. It wasn't exactly a traditional holiday evening, but it was incredibly fun. By the time we finally collapsed into bed, I passed out almost instantly. The cabin was freezing cold and creaked like any old wooden structure, but I was so drained I didn't care, at least not until I woke up. It must have been around 3 or 4 a.m., pitch black outside. I didn't know the exact time, but I knew I de-slept for a while, and something had woken me. Soft, unhurried footsteps echoed from the living room. Not a normal walk, but cautious, deliberate steps, as if someone was trying their hardest not to wake anyone. I blinked a few times, half asleep, and assumed it was one of the guys, maybe heading for water or the bathroom. I lay there listening, expecting the footsteps to continue down the hallway or turn toward the bathroom door. But the sound stayed in roughly the same spot. Floorboards creaking near the front of the cabin, almost like someone pacing back and forth. I wanted to call out and ask if everything was okay, but I didn't want to shout from the dark or step out and scare them. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. Silence returned. I rolled over and fell back asleep. When I finally woke up in the morning, sunlight streamed through the large living room windows, and the guys were already up. My first move was to jokingly ask who had been sneaking around at 4 a.m. I expected some silly excuse. Maybe one of them had been drunk and lost their phone or something like that. But both of them looked at me with identical, utterly confused expressions. Ethan said, "Dude, we all went to bed at 2. Liam shook his head and added he hadn't gotten up once. At first I brushed it off. Maybe I dreamed it or confused a dream sound with reality, but then I glanced at the front door. The lock was open. Not just the deadbolt, the handle lock was unlocked too, fully disengaged. The door was still closed, but neither lock was engaged. I asked if either of them had gone out that morning. Both said no, and when I pointed to the door, I saw their faces go pale as we all realized I might have actually heard something the night before. We were almost certain we de-locked it. But after a moment, Liam offered, maybe the wind blew it open or the old door just didn't latch properly. You know, the usual excuses people make when they don't want to consider anything else. I guess we all wanted to believe it was nothing, so we let it go. We had breakfast bundled in our winter coats, the cabin was still freezing, and spent the day playing video games, watching movies, and just enjoying each other as company. We exchanged small, not-so-great Christmas gifts we'd prepared for one another, and spent some time on video calls with our families. The snow was falling too heavily, and it was too cold to go outside, even though we'd all hoped to take a hike while we were there. As the day wore on, the creaking and the unlocked door became just a strange little mystery, but as darkness fell, a strange sense of dread crept over me. We were all in the living room, playing some dumb Xbox game, laughing and yelling at each other. Every now and then, I caught myself glancing out the window. I'd never noticed it before, but now the darkness outside felt too close, as if someone standing just a few feet away could clearly see us, while we, never spot them. I knew that during the day, trees grew just 10 feet from that window, yet it was so dark I couldn't even make them out. I didn't want to mention my unease. I didn't want to ruin the mood, especially since I had no real reason to feel that way. I hadn't seen anything. Since we hadn't stayed up late the night before, we all went to bed around midnight after Ethan decided to call it early. Liam and I stayed in the living room another 30 minutes, chatting, before we too headed to bed. I lay awake for a while. Hard to say how long I just sat there, but it felt like about an hour. There were no curtains or blinds, so the window next to my bed gave me a deeply unsettling feeling. And then I heard it again. Soft, quiet footsteps in the front of the cabin, in the living room. I sat up and listened as intently as I could. This time, I knew it wasn't one of my friends. But heard them leave their rooms and walk down the hall. So I just listened, trying to decide, was it the house settling or was it really someone? Creaking wood or a person? Every cell in my body tensed as I strained to hear through the darkness, and after a few long seconds, I knew. It was footsteps. Someone's footsteps. They echoed through the living room, perfectly in time with my racing heartbeat. I made a decision. I got up to confront whatever was out there. But just as I reached for the doorknob, the footsteps moved. From the living room, they turned into the hallway, coming closer, passing right by my room, and stopped at the door I thought led to Ethan's room. Then, complete, absolute silence. Seconds stretched like hours. I slowly, almost breathlessly, turned the knob and cracked the door open just enough to peek into the hallway. There, silhouetted in the dark, stood a huge man, tall, at least 6'5", with long hair and a thick beard. He stood perfectly still, facing Ethan's door, frozen in the shadows. I didn't dare look long. I jerked back, but left the door slightly ajar. I didn't want the click of it closing to give away that I'd seen him. In that moment, I was paralyzed with fear. I did not know what to do or how to escape this nightmare. But just 20 seconds later, I heard a faint creak in the hallway. Before I could react, my door swung wide open. The man stood in the doorway, eyes wide, face utterly expressionless. I screamed, a raw, guttural cry, but he didn't flinch. Before I could process what was happening, Ethan and Liam burst from their rooms. I didn't see everything, but Liam, the moment he spotted the stranger, lunged at him. The giant simply swatted him aside like a rag doll, and Liam crashed into the wall, collapsing to the floor. Ethan probably just froze, stunned. But then the man ran. He didn't engage with all of us, just bolted out of the cabin and, as far as we could tell, vanished into the woods. We immediately locked every door and window and called the police. It took over 20 minutes for them to arrive, and the whole time we waited for him to come back. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find, kitchen knives, a fireplace poker, but he never returned. In the end, we never got any answers. Most of the responsibility fell on the cabin owner, since it was his property that had been breached. We never learned what that man wanted, from us or from the cabin. Of our few theories, the most plausible one, in my opinion, was that he might have been looking for the owner and didn't realize it was a rental. That would explain why he looked at me, and at all of us, and then chose not to act. But again, it was just a theory. He could just as easily have come to hurt us, but seeing there were 3 of us, decided to flee. Either way, we were all relieved it hadn't escalated into a full-blown fight, because honestly, I don't know who would, but won in the end. That winter, around the Christmas holidays, I was living with my girlfriend, whom I'll call Olivia. Since we lived far from our families, we almost always traveled for the holidays. That year, we were driving to Olivia's family's house for Christmas. The trip took just under 11 hours. Usually, the drive wasn't that bad, but maybe we'd just been lucky in past years. We loaded all our bags and suitcases into the trunk and set off on Christmas Eve, hoping to arrive that same night and spend the whole Christmas day with her family. The first few hours went smoothly. I guess most people had already made their holiday trips, so the roads were clear. Eventually, I pulled into a small gas station to refuel and take a quick break before continuing. There wasn't a single car there. Olivia waited in the car with the heater on while I ran inside to pay for gas and grab us some drinks. The wind was sharp and bitter, and the lot hadn't been plowed. I had to sprint through nearly 6 inches of snow to reach the building. I opened the door and stepped inside, and immediately noticed how quiet it was. I didn't see anyone. I glanced around for a second, but figured they were probably in the back or something and would come out when I was ready. I grabbed a couple of drinks and approached the counter, but no one appeared. I called out, "Hello?" and even tried peeking into the back room, but saw and heard no one. I think the place was actually empty, even though the doors were unlocked and the lights were on. It was strange, but after a couple of minutes, I just put the drinks back and stepped outside, hoping at least to use the gas pump. The The moment I walked out, I saw a guy standing at Olivia's window. He seemed to be trying to talk to her, tapping on the glass and peering inside. He was bundled tightly in winter gear, so aside from the fact that he was dressed, I couldn't get a good look at him. I started hurrying over, but as soon as he saw me, he backed away and quickly walked off. I got to the car and watched him continue down the road. He clearly wasn't a missing gas station employee, so now I was even more uneasy. I got in and asked Olivia what that guy had been doing. She looked shaken. She said he'd appeared out of nowhere the moment I went inside, and all he kept saying was, "Roll down the window," tapping repeatedly. He didn't say why or anything else. She found it deeply creepy and felt sick, so she kept the doors and windows locked and didn't respond. I didn't even stay. I started the car and drove off, hoping to find another gas station farther down the road. That place gave off such a bad vibe. Neither of us wanted to stay a second longer. Unfortunately, because of that unsettling delay, we had to detour off our main route to find another station. The next one on our path was too far, and the risk of running out of fuel in the middle of a frozen wasteland was too great. It became clear our plans were falling apart. The detour and the snowstorm had thrown us catastrophically off schedule. It was already deep into the night, and we still had 4 hours to go. Exhaustion won out, and we decided to stop at a cheap motel to sleep for a couple of hours and arrive at her family's place on Christmas morning. Olivia called her family to explain the delay while I found a motel just off the highway a few miles ahead. The Motel 24.7 sign glowed in neon, but the parking lot was empty. Well, Christmas Eve is a strange time to check into a motel. I pulled in and headed to the front desk, relieved to see a clerk inside. I quickly booked a small room for the night and went back for our bags. We were so exhausted we passed out almost immediately after checking in. I set an alarm for 2 a.m. so we could leave by 6 and still make it in time for Christmas morning. We slept like the dead. In those 5 hours, I didn't wake up once. When the alarm rang, I struggled to get up, reluctant to leave the warmth of the bed. I let Olivia sleep a bit longer while I gathered our few belongings and carried them to the car. No one had arrived at the motel all night. It was bitterly cold, and the wind cut to the bone. The snow wasn't falling as heavily, but the wind whipped up swirls of snow from the ground, severely limiting visibility. I hurried back, woke Olivia, told her it was time to go, and headed to the front desk to check out. When I stepped into the little office, the clerk was gone. For a moment, I froze, déjà vu from the gas station. But this time, I had definitely seen him earlier. I took a few more steps toward the counter and called out again. Still no one. But I noticed a pile of papers scattered on the floor behind the desk. It looked like the clerk had left in a hurry. A deep sense of dread washed over me. I backed away and ran to get Olivia. I sprinted along the row of doors, opened ours, and told her we needed to leave now. She hurried out and got in the car while I grabbed the last of our things and jumped in. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, and I struggled to maneuver through the snowy lot. As I pulled onto the highway, I passed the motel building and caught a glimpse of a man standing against its wall. Even in that split-second glance, I recognized him, the same guy from the gas station in the same winter coat. Realizing something was seriously wrong, I sped onto the highway and Olivia dialed 911. We met the officers at a gas station 15 minutes away. That is when things got even more alarming and disturbing. One officer pointed out how impossible it would have been for a random stranger to follow us unnoticed. And sure enough, he found a tracker attached right under the rear wheel well of our car. The guy must have placed it there when he approached our vehicle at the gas station. It took over an hour for other officers to reach the gas station and the motel. Olivia and I both went pale when they reported that both employees, the gas station attendant and the motel clerk, had been confirmed missing. Clearly, that man who had been following us was involved. I assume he'd done something to the gas station worker before we arrived. Then, when I showed up, he probably thought I'd seen something I shouldn't have. So he followed us, likely to eliminate us too. I cannot say for sure, because they never found him. The only evidence was a blurry image from the gas station, the security camera. It was definitely the most unsettling way to spend Christmas morning. We thought about it all through the holiday week, but eventually it seemed like the story had ended. After that week, we heard no more news. Unfortunately, I never heard anything about the gas station attendant or the motel clerk. So I suppose it is safe to assume they are both still missing, which makes it even more chilling to think Olivia and I could be disappeared too if we hadn't gotten away. That was 2016. Because of my job, my family, as location, and other circumstances, it was one of the rare times I spent Christmas alone. I had a nice little house in a good neighborhood, and while being alone on the holiday wasn't ideal, I still enjoyed the day, either staying in and watching Christmas movies or taking walks around the neighborhood if the weather was decent. That year, Christmas began quietly. I woke to soft snow falling outside, not a full-blown storm yet. I made coffee, put on Home Alone in the background, and had breakfast on the couch. Honestly, it was pretty nice. Around midday, the snow picked up, though it was still far from a blizzard. I decided to take a quick walk before it got too late. The neighborhood was steeped in holiday cheer, lights on houses, wreaths on doors, not a single car on the road, just a calm, empty, quiet street. During my entire walk, I saw only one person, a guy shoveling his driveway 2 blocks away, otherwise, silence. When I got back home, the wind began to pick up, swirling snow into little eddies down the street. I figured the forecast about an evening storm was right, but I wasn't worried. I had food, blankets, and movies. I was set for the night. The storm hit faster than expected. By 5 p.m., just 30 minutes, the weather shifted from snowfall to full white silence. The wind started rattling the windows. Not enough to alarm me, but enough to remind me I probably shouldn't go outside again. And amid all that noise, the house felt even quieter. I made dinner and kept watching movies. But by 8 p.m., the storm was so loud it drowned out the TV. Something outside was banging, branches maybe, or dislodged Christmas decorations. At the time, I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, around 9 p.m., I heard the first knock. It wasn't loud or frantic, just a single clear knock on the front door. Distinct enough to cut through the howling wind, and definitely a knock, not the dull thud I'd heard before. I froze on the couch. No one ever came to my door on Christmas, and no one should. Been outside in that weather. I muted the TV and waited, listening. For a long time, there was nothing but the storm. Then, 3 more knocks. I stood and walked toward the door, but not close enough to be seen through the side window. I didn't say anything, didn't move the blinds. I just listened. My door had no peephole, only side windows, so if ID looked out, whoever was outside would have seen me too. I stood there until my nerves started fraying. I could barely hear anything over the storm, but whoever it was had stopped knocking, and I decided it was probably best to just let it go. Either way, I wasn't opening the door. Eventually, I returned to the couch, still tense but trying to brush it off. I turned the movie back on, but 5 minutes later, I heard something else. I quickly paused the TV and listened. It was faint, but it sounded like something being dragged slowly through the snow, from the front door all the way around the house. I tracked the sound with my eyes until it reached the back door and stopped. That door had no curtains or coverings, so I didn't even dare peek around the corner. But then came those 3 knocks again. I could hardly believe it. I stood and tried to slowly peek around the corner to look at the back door. Instantly, I saw a pair of eyes staring straight at me. It was so dark, I barely made out the figure before jerking back out of sight. What the hell was he doing there? That was enough for me to call 911, even if nothing else happened, because it was so unnerving. I grabbed my phone and got through to the operator. I was still in the living room, too scared to move and risk being seen again. There was something terrifying in the way those eyes looked at me. I think I stood there talking on the phone for 2 or 3 minutes when suddenly a soft creak sounded, then a loud crash against the back door. I heard glass shatter and pieces of the door slam to the floor. Wind instantly flooded the house, drowning out any other sounds. I assumed the man had broken in, but I heard no footsteps or movement, and I absolutely wasn't going to look. I quickly ducked behind the couch. Not the best cover, but I didn't know what else to do. The fact that I saw and heard nothing except the howling wind made the next 5 minutes agonizingly tense. I knew he must be moving around, looking for me, or maybe stealing things, but I didn't dare peek. Then, finally, I heard knocking at the front door and a police officer, a voice cutting through the wind. I jumped up and ran to let him in, but the man was gone. Wet footprints covered the house. I don't know if he was looking for me or what, but it seemed that after breaking in and barely searching, he just left. His tracks led into the field behind the house and were erased by the blizzard within minutes. Even after the police left, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of my bed with all the lights on, listening to the wind rattle what was left of the back door. At some point, the storm quieted, but the silence felt even worse. Every creak in the house made me jump. Every creak sent a jolt through me like an electric shock. At first light, officers returned to re-examine the scene. They promised to patrol the area for a while, but admitted the blizzard had erased all traces, and there wasn't much they could do. As they left, one of them said something that still echoes in my mind from time to time. He explained that in weather like this, it's not uncommon for people to prowl for unlocked homes, knowing the storm will cover their crimes. But I mentioned the knocking and how he walked around my house. The officer just shook his head. He said some people knock first to see who answers, or if anyone answers at all. By not responding at first, then appearing at the back door, ID essentially confirmed I was home and alone, if that is what he was trying to figure out. I never truly realized how every small decision I made that night led directly to what happened. I was incredibly lucky that man wasn't more persistent in searching for me, because I can't even imagine how it would be ended if he'd been more determined.